Okay, good morning. Welcome to this first day of International Education Week. We're very excited that in mid this November every year, we celebrate International Education Week. It's also this is also Native American Heritage Month as well. And I think that, in November, there are a lot of things that we stop and think about our connection and in different ways. And this week we are organizing about 15 events. So this is the first event of the International Education Week, and having a group of faculty to talk about their virtual exchange and Coil, collaborative online international learning experiences. And we'll have this event here from 6 courses, and that about in different departments, from 10 to 11:30 in the next 90 minutes. So for those of you who have heard about virtual exchange before, this has become much more popular because of the COVID situation over the last 2 years. The field of virtual international exchange started about 10 years ago with the SUNY Coil network in State University of New York system. There was an effort to use online learning to get international students and faculty together in the same classroom to learn from each other. And with the advance of technology, it's become easier for students and faculty members to meet virtually at the same time, or both synchronously, or they can meet asynchronously as well. During the pandemic, Bridgewater has started to implement virtual international exchange with a few cases last year. And this year, we have about 6 to 8 courses that adopt virtual exchange ideas. And so we have a panel discussion today it's divided into 2 parts. The first part is going to be 3 faculty members who have all done their virtual exchanges with Japan, with students from Japan and with their own students here at BSU. And then we'll shift our gears to 3 case studies, and 3 different faculty members work on their classes with students from Brazil, from Israel, and also from Hong Kong. So we'll hear from these 3 presenters as well. So I'd like to introduce the first panel. We have Dr. Seniseros from Global Languages and Literatures, Dr. Karen Richardson from the newly named Health and Kinesiology Department, and also from Alexandra Balconi from the TESOL or TEFL, whatever they call it, department, right? Teachers of English for English of second other languages. What's which name would you use?
TESOL, yeah, teaching English to speakers of other languages. Yeah. TESOL. The department name is TESOL, but other abbreviations are used in the courses like TEFL, TESL. So yeah, I know it can be confusing.
Yeah, thank you. So the first question is, can each of you tell us a little bit about what's your class and what are the goals of developing virtual exchange in this class and in your teaching, and how does it change your class? Who would like to start?
Maybe I can start.
Yes, please, Renee.
This semester, I'm collaborating with Osaka City University in Japan to offer several Coil sessions for my Japanese cultures second-year seminar students and their students in progressive speaking class. And I'm working with Professor Fuse, who is the primary instructor of the class, and Dr. Wallstadt, who is a coordinator of their Coil sessions. And today we're fortunate to have them in our audience members, and Professor Fuse joining us from Japan, Osaka, Japan, and Dr. Wallstadt from Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us today. And my second-year seminar is an interdisciplinary exploration of broad topics concerning history, literature, religion, and art in Japan. Emphasis is placed on the historical trend, which have become central to Japanese cultural identities. In this course, students view selective films to investigate how the media influences representation. And in the readings that they pay particular attention to the point of view, context, background from which texts were written. And these readings, viewings, and discussions help students demonstrate an in-depth understanding of distinctive elements of Japanese culture. And this reflective learning process helps students examine their preconceived notions about the value systems of other cultures, Japanese culture in particular. Through the synchronous Coil sessions, students have had an opportunity to exchange ideas with students in Japan in real time to deepen their understanding of Japanese culture. So I really believe that it was valuable, very valuable experience for our BSU students, or at least that's what I hope for.
Thank you. We're going to do a round robin. So Karen.
Sure, thanks. I'm happy to share. And I do apologize, I don't have students with me today. They are in another class and they are out teaching in some middle schools. So the collaboration I'm doing is with Tokyo Gakuge University, and I'm paired with students there who are, and my students are involved in a course called Teaching Curriculum Development in Middle School Physical Education. And so we are really coming together and thinking about what does physical education curriculum look like in Massachusetts, and then really what does it look like in Japan, because in Japan there is basically a national curriculum, whereas in the United States our curriculum is set at the state level. So the goals I have are lofty, and I feel like I came to them as a result of doing some face-to-face exchanges back in 2017 when we had students from Japan come to Bridgewater for 2 weeks, and then when we went to Tokyo. So the goals I have for this exchange, again, kind of lofty. I want students to develop kind of an awareness of their worldview, and then how this relates to other people's worldviews, and in particular, when we think about teaching physical education, how does this all fit in? What does this mean, in our society? And then, the other part too, the other goal that I have is that through this cross-cultural exchange, that my students and the students from Tokyo Gakuge will be able to collaborate and really kind of work as global citizens in a project related to physical education. I think we've done too much work in education that we're doing it in our small little silos, whether it's in the state or a country, and there's so much to learn, from each other. So, yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell what my goals are and what my inspiration for doing the Coil.
So my course where I'm integrating a Coil project is called Cultural Issues in Teaching English as a Second or Foreign Language. And students take this course as part of the TESOL certificate or TESOL minor programs at Bridgewater State University. So they're learning, they're preparing to become teachers of English language learners, and many of them are planning to teach English overseas, and that's why they're in the program, in the TESOL certificate in particular. So an intercultural exchange project of this sort, a Coil project, fits really well into a course like this, because one of the goals of the course is to analyze cross-cultural interactions and engage in cross-cultural interactions through projects, which before integrating Coil, I tried to create those opportunities, but they were limited compared to a Coil project. So in the Coil project, my students, or and my course partners with a course at Kansai Gakuin University in Japan. And it's a 7-week project, and my students meet with the course that I teach is virtual, but there are meeting opportunities, integrated into the course, and we meet as a whole class once, and then twice students meet on their own in their small groups. Goals and the impact on my course is that students have authentic opportunities to practice intercultural communication skills, develop their intercultural competence, learn about the different culture, learn about English language learners, because the students in Kansai Gakuin University are in an English language course. They're learning English, and culture goes hand in hand with learning English. So my students do not only learn how to introduce culture to those students in Japan, but they also analyze their own cultural beliefs and develop their own intercultural competence.
Oh, thank you very much. I think all three of courses deal with some of the very fundamental concepts and issues relating to culture, education, and language learning. And I think in many cases, these are really the foundations of a lot of cross-cultural dialogues and exchanges. And it's really clearly seen from these three case studies that focus on learning about Japanese culture, learning about the educational system, focusing on the physical education arena, and also learning about languages for both English, for natives and for teaching English as well. In terms of how you organize your Coil and virtual exchanges between your students, what are some of the examples of how they interacted with each other in terms of their student engagement? Some of you briefly mentioned that, but could you give some examples of that? And how did the students work together with each other, and how does it impact their learning?
In my case, although I originally intended to offer these Coil sessions targeting my second-year seminar students, I decided to include my Japanese language students in 4 more classes. And it worked out well. And Professor Hussein and I decided to assign assigned films and then ask students to create analytical discussion questions to help both BSU students and Osaka City University students to engage in discussion in breakout rooms. And through the Coil session, students have been able to engage diverse perspectives, which is extremely important, as you know, to thrive in an increasingly global interconnected world. And I like to believe that participation in the Coil sessions helps students recognize that other ways of living and communicating are just as real as their own. And I would like to actually now to turn it over to my one of my students, Nick Seniseros, so that he can share his thoughts on students' engagement based on his experience participating in our Coil sessions.
Hi, yeah, I'm Nicholas Seniseros. I'm my 4th year over here at BSU, and as far as like the Coil sessions go, I think overall they've been pretty good. I think because a lot of us attending the meetings are here like intentionally, so it does help with that in terms of engagement. And because conversation especially is important in this, and I think an important thing to remember is that we sort of need it helps to feel extra comfortable talking as well, because remember for the first meeting in particular, like some students were just kind of apprehensive a bit to really put themselves out there to talk about that. But once we started, like whether it was like someone who was more not going to put it a step forward to talk first, then that's when conversations really kicked off and people started getting more locked in engagement, and we had a lot of interesting conversations and we learned some stuff about the cultures. And so I think a good like sort of first step with engaging students is again just making them comfortable with speaking. And also like on a fundamental level, it helps to have like a good mix of activities too. I feel especially the second meeting we've had so far was like especially good, where we had a good mix of, all right, like beginning of, all right, here's what this meeting is going to be about. Then we had, the Japanese students presenting on their topic, And we also had like a review thing that we had to do to make sure that we were paying attention. And then we had a separate thing of just talking about like sort of culture aspects relating to what the presentation was about. And I also really liked that because it didn't even really so much feel like work. It was just kind of, it felt like a laid back conversation, and a lot of us were really into it. And yeah, it was, it was really engaging. So again, just feeling comfortable and just kind of having a good mix of things to do to like keep our attention. So it's not like nothing drags on too long. It's good like directions to take with this sort of thing. And yeah, that's most that comes to mind as far as the meetings we've had so far.
Thank you for offering a student perspective. I'm sure that Dr. Richardson and Dr. Belconi's students also have some feedback, and they also observe how they interacted with each other.
Yeah, it was actually, thank you for sharing that. It was interesting to sort of hear that the idea that having sort of that laid back conversation is important. It makes me reflect and think that maybe in our Coil, we are trying to do too many projects. It's very, I feel like sometimes we're kind of rushing through our projects to sort of have this big thing take place. So that's really helpful to hear that. Some specific ways that students in our Coil are interacting. Again, sort of standard Coil, we started with some getting to know you activities that they were able to do together. And then when we met last week, they were sharing some information about their sort of their own cultures. And they were supposed to do this project together where they were having a conversation and showing where there were similarities and differences. And what I came to understand is that it almost seemed like we did more side by side, so US students put this information, my students from Japan put this information in, then we had a nice conversation about how do we do collaborative work. And so that was, I think that was important in the process. So again, in our Coil, we have 4 sessions that we do synchronously as a class, but then in the other 5 weeks, the students are setting up times to meet synchronously with their teams. So there's a lot of engagement that way. I'd say one way that we've been able to work together, I think better this year, that there's more engagement, is my students are now learning to use the Zoom Translate and the PowerPoint translation features. And that's been important. We also made a decision to make sure that when Dr. Suzuki and I are giving directions, that we give them both in English and in Japanese, so that we're not privileging, because last year we did a lot of things in English. And I thought, well, that's not okay. I want my students to also hear Japanese and to be immersed in that language, and maybe to have that struggle of what it feels like not to understand things. So yeah, so that's kind of, again, we're aiming towards a project where the students will be co-creating a lesson plan together based on a shared problem. So I'm excited to see that over the next couple of weeks.
That's great.
So in my course, collaboration or engagement happens through, there are several stages, and the 3 stages when students collaborate and interact with each other are ice breaking, team building, and collaboration. So the ice breaking is the very first week when the whole 2 groups of students, including the course instructors, me and the course instructor from the partner university, when all of us meet, and that's where we introduce the Coil project to our students, and we create opportunities for them to get to know each other through small breakout rooms activities that they complete during that first Zoom meeting. And then in the following 2 weeks, during the team building and collaboration stages, they meet on their own in small groups. And during the team building stage, they the goal for my students is to get to know the Japanese students in their small groups really well, not just their culture, but also their language needs. And the Japanese students actually reflect on because they're English language learners, and the course that they, as I already mentioned, the course in which the Coil project is integrated is the English language course. So their goal is to learn English as part of that course. And they introduce their challenges and their strengths and weaknesses with the English language to my students. And my students get to know the Japanese partners and get to know their culture, because they teach something about their culture as well to my students. And then my students have all this information, and during the collaboration stage, they meet again, and my students plan a lesson to teach to the Japanese students. In the lesson, they teach about the American culture and also some language related aspects. So these are the three stages during which students interact with each other, collaborate, and engage in collaborative activities. And it's an online, like I already mentioned, it's an online course. So meetings are not part of or required or scheduled meetings. Course meetings are not part of the course. However, there are meeting opportunities for students during which they interact by have live interaction. And of course, for each of the stages, there is quite a lot of reflection that both groups of students do in their courses. My students do as part of my course through learning diaries, through discussions and other self-assessments. And we focus quite a bit on their intercultural competence and cultural and intercultural exchange, and what situations come up during these meetings that they didn't expect. I ask them to analyze this and but also analyze their own cultural beliefs, and in this way they develop their intercultural competence.
Well, you can see a variety of formats that these faculty members are using to engage their students, whether synchronously or asynchronously. And I was curious about the breakout room size or the group size. What is the best for your situation? How large a group should that be that enable meaningful engagement and collaboration?
So in my project, we have groups of 4 in total. So 2 students from Japan and 2 students from my course. And in that way, they have a partner, but at the same, each of them within their kind of roles. But at the same time, it doesn't become overwhelming with the amount of people because scheduling is always challenging with the 14-hour difference. And that's why we kept that in mind when we were creating the groups. And we decided that groups of 4, 2 from Japan and 2 from my class would work really well.
Is it the same for you, Karen? Or a little bit bigger, your group?
We're a little bit, 1 or 2 of our groups are 5 students, because we have 25 students in total, 14, excuse me, from my class and 10 from Naoki's class. But I think that number of 4 is about as big as we would like to go.
Yeah, Nicholas.
Yeah, because I remember in my experience with some of the breakout rooms, I think we had like approximately 4 to 5-ish like students per group, and I think generally it was about a good number. I think when it was like whenever it was in a larger amount, we did have good discussions, but I did notice there were some students who like didn't talk much. It was usually like 2 or 3 that did most of the talking, and maybe occasionally like the last couple stragglers would maybe comment once or twice. And so, yeah, I think probably 4 around that is a good number.
Sounds like there's a lot of agreement about the 4 to 6 people would be a good size for each group. You already mentioned about some of the ways in which you engage the students. I was wondering about some challenges you have had so far, and how do you assess whether you're trying to overcome some of those challenges?
Sorry, Alexander mentioned a little bit, but one of the challenges in developing virtual exchange with institutions in Japan is the time difference between Japan and here. the Eastern time zone. Professor Fuse wanted to develop virtual exchange for her class, which starts at 9 a.m. in Japan Standard Time, which means my students and I have to be available 8 p.m. or 7 p.m. And Professor Fuse wanted to have 3 Zoom sessions, and I could not require my students to participate in those 3 Zoom sessions simply because those meetings were scheduled outside of our regular class time. So what I did was I designed coursework for all 5 classes, second year seminar and 4 Japanese language courses without including Coil sessions. And I offer those 3 Zoom sessions as an optional activities for students to participate as their virtual study abroad experience. And this means that I have to do this Coil work as my volunteer work or extra work. And that was very challenging, but I managed to teach 5 classes and actually do APR as an overload and then prepare 3 Coil sessions. It was a crazy semester for me, but we were able to do it. And I was also very fortunate enough to have many motivated, dedicated students in my classes. So the first Coil session, we have 14 BSU students on October 8th. I did not even give an extra credit. That was just totally that they're willing to talk to students. So I have very motivated students. And then 7 BSU students joined a second Coil session last week. It was a very busy week for everyone here. And our last Coil session is scheduled on November 29th, and I'm hoping that the more students will participate. And another challenge was the language barrier, and I think we all talked a little bit about this. Expressing themselves in English is very challenging for students in Japan, as we can imagine. And then prior to attending Coil sessions, I told all my BSU students to be respectful and understanding. And I reminded them how challenging it would be to make themselves understood in a foreign language. My Japanese language students are very understanding because they know exactly how hard it is to express themselves in Japanese. And my second year seminar students are also very understanding because they themselves are learning how to give a presentation effectively. And they know it is challenging to express their ideas even in their native language, let alone the foreign language. So my students are very respectful and kind while communicating with Osaka City University students during the Zoom sessions. And I was very proud of them.
Yeah, I really like the idea of creating assignments as kind of overlap and bring shared content. Because that's important. And I think, from what you have said in the presentations, that's really, there is enough space for us to kind of deviate a little bit from the regular syllabi to something creative, so you can accommodate, of course, all students from different cultures, but at the same time, encourage them to participants and to contribute to that content, as Nick mentioned. It's, and Karen, I think, enforced it, that layback, and then you have this conversation. So it becomes a students, faculty, managing effort to make the session interactive. So I really appreciate that. I enjoy it.
I'll jump in and share some challenges and ways that we've overcome them. Obviously, as when I've said that the challenge of the difference of 14 hours is difficult. So I was able to plan this course in the evening. So the course that I've paired up with for the Coil meets now from 4:45 to 7:15, and I was able to plan ahead for that. So that's allowed us to have some flexibility, so that we actually, it lines up a little bit better. So that planning a semester ahead was super helpful. Another challenge that we face, and it's funny that, again, this is the second year we're doing it. Our first session, we had far too much professor talk, and it's really not my style in terms of teaching, but that's something that I need to work on with my partner, Naoki, so that we make sure that we are modeling in that first session the way that we want students to interact. So one of the things that I would like to do for next year, if we do this, would be to start with an asynchronous session and make sure that we then just do some screencasts to record the information about how to use the ImmerseU platform that we're using, what are the goals, and then get the students to meet their group, so and that they can start to work together kind of parallel. But I think that asynchronous start will be really important for us. So in one of the things I think that I will do is have them start with a project that is potentially a getting to know you activity on shared Google Slides, where they are just putting information in. And then when we come together in that first session, they then can talk to each other about what they've already kind of parallel planned. So those are some of my ideas. But again, the planning of the course in the evening was one of the best things I've done.
So for my course, I can totally relate to Karen and Mine in terms of the time difference, 14-hour time difference. And not only the fact that we had to schedule our meetings off the regular hours, but also when students work on their own schedule in small group meetings between themselves. We already ran into this twice last week, that they confuse the time. So they forget who is behind and who is ahead. And that's something that we are not CC'd on these emails. They interact between themselves, and then someone doesn't show up because they thought it's at a different time. So this is probably the only challenge that I see as a challenge, but other things I see as normal aspects of implementing a project like this. That's why I really don't, I think everything is, I mean, I'm learning, like Karen said, you're learning how to improve it moving forward. I'm learning as well, but there are a few things that I wanted to mention in response to this question. So I think that something that I think is extremely important is to keep in mind that, well, finding a partner, first of all, right? A partner with whom you can create a Coil project that you envision, and but also keeping in mind that you need to be really flexible, because your partner comes from a different culture, from a different university, different background. And it's very important to be flexible when designing a Coil project, but also it's great to find these points where you will agree and you will both of you will be happy about it from the standpoint of designing this project. One more thing that I noticed, that some of the students get really nervous, especially at the beginning. It doesn't mean that it lasts for a long time, but at the beginning, no matter how hard you try to explain that you don't have to be nervous, and it's you will interact with people from other cultural backgrounds in your life if you haven't done it yet. And it's they are also learning through this project and so on and so forth. They're in the same position, and moreover they use English and it's not their native language, and so on and so forth. I encountered some nervousness, which got much better moving forward from some of the students. And one more thing, which, like I said, I don't see it as a challenge, but it's part of planning and implementing the Coil project from the point of view of the instructor, is spending, like Mine said, extra time on planning, and not just extra time, but a lot of extra time. It's basically designing a new course. So in my class, it's a 7-week project, which means roughly half of the semester, and it entailed a lot of designing throughout the summer, on a weekly basis, collaborating with my partner, and continuing to do it as the semester started and moving forward. So yeah, these are a few things that I wanted to share.
Quick follow-up, Nick?
Yeah, and especially the part where you mentioned like around the beginning, students feeling nervous no matter what. Yeah, because again, I think, icebreakers and just like prior sort of notices of like, don't be nervous, like that sort of thing helps a lot. But it is still an issue around the beginnings of these sorts of things, where students will just be nervous to talk, like even in like first language, like just settings, students are still nervous. But I noticed even in our second meeting, a lot of the communication apprehension was already kind of ironed out. Even the Japanese students were like very forward with, speaking, and all the American students were responding in kind. And yeah, and again, I think that goes all along with having a laid back atmosphere, but I think it's also good to remember, like, not so laid back that everything's just unfocused, because we still had like sort of things framing all our conversations, and I think that helped us focus and sort of facilitate talking even better because we had something to talk about. And I think that worked really well, especially with our second meeting. So yeah, again, and I think it's good to remember that even if things start out kind of awkward, not great with talking, like eventually those things will iron themselves out. But again, good to keep in mind that have something to sort of facilitate conversation as well.
I have a question. Did you agree on technology that is accessible to both, let's say, institutions or institutions? How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good to have like shared things that we're all working with, because we all have a mutual understandings of like we're on the same level. Could you refresh me just one more time about like the details of that again?
I think the faculty members can chime in about what kind of technology they use for facilitating the discussions, and how did they work with the other partners on that.
So
For professors too.
I said for our collaboration, we are using the BSU platform that Tokyo Gakuge purchased, so we're able to use that. The students are doing a lot using their own apps and things like that. So they're communicating on Zoom. They're actually not they're not kind of going through the platform, but it is nice to have that shared site that students from both institutions can access.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, probably. Because again, yeah, as long as like a thing where we're all working on a similar level of like working with the same things. Yeah, as opposed to if we were all just doing our own things, like using our own programming, and then just kind of meeting in a thing that only one of us uses. I think it's good to have a familiarity. And again, that probably just adds to a lot of like the comfort and relaxed manner of, all right, we're all just working with the same stuff. And also, like, if it's like a cultural thing where like students from one culture like typically use something else, that's also like another learning sort of moment experience. Yeah.
We planned to use the BSU platform, and in the first week we changed our mind because we realized that there would be more things to do outside of that platform, and we didn't want to use it for just one assignment. Maybe we will use it in the future, but students communicate on Zoom, and we also found it important or helpful to give specific instructions to who will schedule the Zoom meeting and create the Zoom link and share it with the group, because there may be a lot of confusion, or 2 links shared instead of 1 or even more than 2, because there are 4 members in each group. So my partner at the university in Japan, she instructs her students to create the Zoom meetings and share them with the whole group. And it works really well. And other than that, they communicate by email, and it has been working well so far.
I've seen a lot of other folks commented on the chat about the different medium to use, like Jamboard and Padnet, and it's so creative these days for us to post something immediately. Having both group of students able to, load the document and then just comment on it, write on it. There's also the Google Doc to share. There's also other things that faculty have used. So it's really creative, trying to use different technologies. I think they talk about which technology would be good. It's important for faculty to work together, to have a meeting, to plan ahead. And I'm sure that for Alexandra and Karen, and they plan for a long time over those collaborations as well. Now, finally, we have about 5 minutes left because we started late. And if I could ask you to conclude, what's one tip or recommendation or a couple of them you would like to share for other faculty who would like to start to do a project like that?
Actually, I'm the least experienced Coil faculty member, so I'd like to hear from my colleagues, but I really think it's important to build mutually clear expectations with your prospective Coil partner. And I think the institutional support is also very important for sustaining BSU faculty Coil engagement. So, I hope that we can talk more about this.
I actually have 4 relatively quick points. I would say the first recommendation is establish, clear shared learning outcomes that you're both really committed to. I think the second piece, which we learned from Coil, is to scaffold the relationship building between the students. All of us today talked about the ice breaking, the partner work, small group sharing, and then the collaborative work, but it has to kind of happen in that order. The other piece I think that Alexandra just mentioned, support and hold students accountable for scheduling the meeting times for the asynchronous work, but support them as well. And then I think the other piece is just real honest, open communication among the faculty members and faculty to students when problems arise. Trying to get students to share with faculty when they struggled with meeting times. It's okay. We're all in this together. So those are my recommendations. It's fantastic. My students last year said it was the most powerful thing that they did all fall. And that meant a lot when we were all virtual. So I just encourage everyone to give it a try.
I have 4 quick points as well, and some of them overlap with Minnie and Karen's points. And I'll just quickly mention them. So something that we talked about a little bit, be ready to spend extra time and plan ahead for this. On designing and teaching the course, integrating a Coil project. Then develop a collaboration model that between you and your partner, the earlier the better, something like how regularly you meet, we even write down tasks for each of us for each week. We meet every week, and then we have those tasks that we have a Google, shared Google folder where we upload everything. So there needs to be some structure between you and the partner, the partner instructor. Then my next point is, if you implement your Coil project later in the semester, prepare your students in advance for it. So I started my Coil project in week 8, and during the 7 weeks before the Coil project, I was reminding my students about it. I was posting some frequently asked questions, some overviews, and just in my announcements, I was reminding that be ready, that's what is coming up, and then we are getting closer to this and so on. And I was asking them to remember that they will need to connect the content to what they will learn through the Coil project and so on. And also talk openly with your students about the benefits of participating in a Coil project, and that it's not just a requirement for this course, but it's a form of lifelong learning, and how much they will benefit from this experience moving forward in their careers, in their just personal communication. And it's definitely worth discussing with your students.
Well, I think these are wonderful recommendations, and I'm glad that we recorded that, and faculty members can actually take the advice and think about what they should consider if they try to implement a virtual exchange class next semester or next year. I do think that the different models here are instructive, because sometimes you could do it all synchronously, but you could also do a lot of work asynchronously or outside of your regular class time, so students can work together. And the most important thing is to feed back to each other the things that done outside the classroom should be connected to the things that done in the class. So both sides are reinforcing each other, or you could just focus on mostly outside the class to do it asynchronously, but it will benefit the students. So you hear about the different models. Some are required and integrated into a class as a part of the assessment, and some of it is entirely optional. So there's no one size fits all for virtual exchange. We have seen the model from free interactions to 7 to 12 interactions in this seminar here. So if you have other questions, you can write it on the chat for the 3 faculty members who work on Japan. We're going to now transition to the second panel that would include case studies on Brazil, Israel, and Hong Kong. And we have Dr. Fernanda Ferreira here from Global Languages and Literatures. And we have Dr. Kevin McGowan here from Early Childhood and Secondary and Elementary Education. And then we have Dr. Emily Spitzman here from TESOL department. So the same question I asked the previous panel, can you explain to the audience a little bit about what's your class and what are the goals of implementing virtual exchange in your class and in your teaching, and how does it change your class so far?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fernanda Ferreira, and I'm here also with my student, Matthew Donahue, who was here just a second ago. Where is he?
Sorry.
Oh, there he is. Okay. So this project that we started, the goal was to provide more opportunities for my students of Portuguese 101 to interact in more authentic manner with the Brazilian students at the State University of São Paulo. And I work closely with Dr. Suzy Cavallari, who had done that kind of work before. So basically the goals, like I said, is to provide more opportunities for students to increase their own proficiency. And a second related goal, which is similar to that, is for the students in Brazil to increase their proficiency in English. So it changed, how it changed my class. It changed my 101 class profoundly, because before the exchange that the students only had was with the authentic languages, just with myself. And now they have another person and a lot more time to focus in deep, real, authentic communication in Portuguese. And I'll let Matt explain a little bit about the opportunities that he encountered in speaking Portuguese.
Yeah, so like Dr. Ferreira explained, basically the gist of it is we, as Portuguese 101 students at BSU, are partnered up with English majors at the State University of Sao Paulo. And it's been super fascinating because each of us can really learn from each other. That's the benefit of having something like this. Each of us presumably are native speakers of the other's target language. So we in the US can really benefit from their insights into Portuguese, which, as you probably know, can be kind of a tough language to learn as a second language in many respects. Dr. Ferreira and I were just chatting about this during advising the other night. And certainly, even as a native speaker, I would argue there are few languages quite as difficult to pick up after the fact as English. So they can also benefit from some of our insights a little bit. But it's been super fascinating, really. I think it's been a great opportunity for us to sort of bounce ideas off each other about the language, about culture, both in the Northeastern US and in Brazil. And it's been a really great learning opportunity that, would be totally impossible without the kind of collaboration that, we've all been talking about here all morning. And I think it really adds another dimension. Obviously, like Dr. Ferreira was saying before, she would be the only native source of the target language we would have had. And now we have people our age. It adds another dimension to it that is really great, I think, in terms of learning the language, both ways, for them learning English and us learning Portuguese.
Thank you.
Feel free, Kevin or Emily.
Okay, I will jump in here. So good morning, everyone. Kevin McGowan. I'm from the Department of Elementary and Early Childhood Education. And the course that is participating in the Coil project, course I teach, is the Integrated Creative Curriculum for Early Childhood Teachers, grades pre-kindergarten through grade 2. My counterpart at the University of Hong Kong teaches a similar course with a similar title, Integrated Creative Curriculum for Early Childhood Education. So the overarching goal for this particular COIL project is for me as well as my students to engage in what I call reciprocal empathy for the other. And in terms of what I really mean by that is for you to intentionally think about what it is to empathize with someone who is from a different race and a different culture. And to think about, is it more difficult to empathize with that person because they are from a different race or a different culture? And also another overarching goal is to provide opportunities for early childhood pre-service teachers from Hong Kong University and Bridgewater State University to explore an integrated early childhood curriculum from a different cultural perspective and lens.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Emily Spitzman, and I am in the TESOL department, teaching English to speakers of other languages. And I'm part of the Game Changers in Education program. We were actually approached as a university by Game Changers in Education, which is an organization that promotes learning about how to negotiate across cultures. And so they approached Wing Kai and Patty Emmons and others, and then they reached out to us and said, would you be interested? And so Naveed Fauzi and myself and Ashley Rodriguez are all collaborating on this project together as faculty who are working with the Game Changers in Education program. So immediately upon hearing about the program promoting negotiation skills, I was very excited because I do a lot of work on intercultural competence development across boundaries and across differences in my classes, thinking specifically about power imbalances, race, gender, socioeconomic status, all of those, power-laden dynamics. And so when I heard about this, I was like, oh, this is a perfect fit. I don't know that much about negotiation and I can't wait to learn. And so it's really been an exciting journey to learn more about negotiation skills and how I can form more of a integration with the intercultural competence development work that I do in my classes.
I would follow up with the second question, the same second question about the ways in which you engage students in what kind of format. And I think Kevin mentioned it briefly, but if you could, each of you just explain a little bit more about how you implement that class and how your students participated in that class in terms of student engagement and what impact does it have on your students so far. And I know that we have a student who's my graduate assistant, Kate, who participated in the program on Israel as well. And she can also speak about that.
Sounds great. Should I start with the next thing?
Yes.
Okay. So some of the examples, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of the examples of student engagement. So in our classes, the Portuguese 101 and then the English class in Brazil, participants are required to create a text or an audio of themselves speaking Portuguese based on a particular theme in the class. And then, like, for example, because this is a Portuguese 101 class, it's like physical descriptions and daily routines, for example, was one of the things, favorite foods, and then send the text over to their partner a couple of days before their screen time online, and then together they can use that task as a springboard for further conversation. And that in a way helps out with the initial awkwardness, you know, that one experiences. We didn't do this in the very first meeting. The very first meeting was just get to know each other. And, you know, we were very fortunate that the Brazilian students were much more fluent, much more proficient because they were English majors in Brazil. Whereas in my class, you know, we have 17 to 19 students, and they're basically Portuguese 101 students. They're elementary new learners, you know, true beginners of Portuguese. And so we had to really make sure that we scaffolded the meetings beforehand, before their interaction. And I think that that's one of the examples that we used. And I don't know if Matthew wants to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, I do think that being, you know, having to prepare the texts ahead of time not only sort of eliminates a lot of the awkwardness in terms of the engagements themselves, since we have more of a base from which to work, we have something to talk about, but it also is just good practice, frankly, in terms of, you know, learning the language itself. You're not going to get any better practice with the language than execution. And so, you know, even just having to prepare a few sentences in Portuguese helps a lot in terms of figuring out, you know, how do I construct a sentence? What diacritics do I need where? What terms can I use to express myself? So I think in that aspect, it's also really helpful.
So some of the examples. Oh, go ahead,
please.
Winkai.
Yeah, I'm trying to just ask. Yeah, please, Kevin.
I was just going to jump in here and talk about some of the examples from our course. First of all, my counterpart at the University of Hong Kong and I decided to do this asynchronously. And this is my first time experimenting with connecting Coil to this particular course. So what I wanted to do was kind of look at my course objectives. So as I talked to students, I wanted to explain to them that this is an additional project that we will be doing, but I didn't want them to look at it as just an add-on. I wanted to demonstrate to them how this connected to our course objectives. So 3 of the course objectives that this really directly connects to are plan, assess, and reflect on instruction based on needs and changing circumstances and social contexts through lesson planning, demonstrate thoughtful, effective verbal and nonverbal communication skills and responsive listening skills, and also exhibit sensitivity to community, racial, and cultural norms while recognizing individual differences and experiences. So I think their participation in this Coil project is going to help them remember this 5 years from today, because I'm always thinking, well, what do I really want them to be able to remember 5 years from today and incorporate into their future classrooms? And I think this is really a way for them to connect authentically to the experiences of other cultures and other races. So we will do this through comparing BSU and Hong Kong University early childhood lesson plans, compiling interview questions about curriculum design, and also students created videos to share with Hong Kong University students. I'd created a video to share so that my Hong Kong counterpart could share with his students, and he created a video for me to share with my students, giving an overview of what early childhood education looks in our respective areas and universities.
So
And the videos, yeah, please.
In my courses, so I forgot to mention before that I'm integrating this project into 3 of my courses because of the synchronous component. It's twice a week for an hour and a half over the course of 6 weeks synchronously. That is the requirement for the Game Changers in Education program. And because of that huge time commitment for students, in addition to their coursework time, because they can't meet during their courses. So Kate, maybe you can speak to that as well, in a moment, just the intensity of that synchronous time. I have it in 3 courses. So I have only, 5 students participating. They chose it to participate optional. It was an option in my strategies for multilingual learners class as part of the TESOL certificate and the TESOL minor. I have a couple students from that course. I have a couple students from my honors seminars, which are intercultural communication and language learning, technology. And then 1 student from my SEI course, which is sheltered English immersion, and supporting students to learn how to teach English and content at the same time. So just wanted to put that out there, that it's not connected only to 1 course, but it's connected to 3. And so I've built in a reflection component where the students actually act as teaching assistants in the course. And I have them at the beginning of each class, when we meet synchronously for my courses, I actually have the students share what they're learning from this negotiation program and connect back to, it connects back to our content. So they've been working with me in that regard. And then in my fully online class, it's going to be integrated into our final Zoom session, which we do synchronously. It's very intensive, a lot of synchronous time. And I think that was one of the hesitancies on the part of students for signing up in the first place, was they just didn't have the time. They wanted to, but they didn't necessarily have the time to do it, to be able to integrate it in. But the teaching assistant model has actually worked out really well. Like, I think in the beginning of the classes, the students are sharing out and they're having these really transformative experiences in the program. So it's really helping enhance our content. Kate, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak. Like you were saying, Dr. Spitzman, it is a time commitment, a major time commitment. It's about 3 hours per week. And it's interesting, as the weeks have gone on, it feels like in its own right, the Game Changers program has become like a mini course almost. But ironically, I feel like that time commitment was actually necessary to foster these relationships amongst the students from BSU and the Israeli universities, because we are talking about something that can be applied to all different types of international interaction. We're talking about negotiation skills, and we're doing a lot of role-playing activities and having conversations about sort of what are pros and cons of different negotiation strategies, and how someone can look at a different point of view while not compromising their own point of view in a discussion. And in order to have the very fruitful and in-depth conversations that we've had, we have had to build those connections, which thankfully we have been able to do with the time that we have dedicated each week to attending the classes. Because at the beginning of the session, I didn't know any of the students from Israel, and it was a lot of ice breaking in the beginning. But as the weeks have gone on, and as Avi has done a really good job of mixing up the groups, like the breakout rooms on Zoom, we've gotten to know each other. So I'm talking to people now in breakout rooms that I didn't recognize in the very first session, but being able to really shuffle us around and build those relationships with everybody in the session, not just a certain group of people in the session, has really helped to build those connections. And I feel like has really made the conversations very interesting and very eye-opening, because each student, even if we're all attending like the same university, like different groups, everyone has their own perspective. And so it's really kind of like, oh, I never thought about this way. So it's made the role playing really engaging. And I, as a student participant, feel like I've really walked away learning a lot so far.
Wow, I'm struck by the similarities between some of these panels and actually some of these projects. But I also struck by the emphasis on reciprocity and equity in cross-cultural communications and interactions, and how each of you try to create a model that both sides would co-create or contribute half to the content and be equal on an equal basis. Like Fernanda's cases is 25 minutes for each side to speak in another language. For the Game Changers program, it's a lot of interactions between all three universities in all different multiple settings. And in Kevin's situation, it's one video for each side, so both sides would talk about that. I'm also struck by the pairing of the similarities and in today's panel, because Karen and Kevin are both dealing with education curriculum. The students are developing curricula or thinking about curricula and in different cultural contexts. Alexandra and Fernanda are both helping their students to learn languages and to think about the relationship between language and culture, and in learning Portuguese and English. And of course, for the optional, Coil, and both Minnie and Emily engage their students outside their regular class, but try to make it a part of their own as well, and get their students extra experiences to benefit from them. So I think you can look at all these 6 or 7 presentations more collectively and think about how they intersect with each other, whether you're talking about education or culture or language learning. I asked the same question earlier about the challenges for the panelists about your classes, and if you could share any challenges and how you overcame those challenges, and have overcome some challenges so far, and how are you addressing those issues?
Thank you so much, Winkai. I'll start. So some of the challenges are very similar to the challenges that were mentioned before with the previous 3 panelists, is that the time change. We were very fortunate that we were talking with students from Brazil, and so the difference is only 1 or 2 hours. And so we were also very fortunate that the Brazilian students and my Coil partner in Brazil, Dr. Suzy Cavallari, she was okay with changing their time. So, because these are synchronous, because we actually meet on Zoom with all my 17, 19 students and her 17, 19 students. And I say that because there was some attrition, some students stopped coming. So that was the first challenge, but thankfully she was able to accommodate us, and we have planned for 5 separate meetings, synchronous meetings throughout the semester. The other challenge was of a technological nature. We needed to make sure to create these breakout rooms beforehand so that the participants, so they're duets, right? So there were 2 students, one Brazilian, one from BSU. And so we want to make sure that they didn't have to wait around. So the first session, everybody was in the main room, and I had to physically assign students to each of their breakout rooms and then open the breakout rooms. And then on the second meeting, I was able to sort of not the second or the third meeting, I was able to connect with IT to solve this problem so that the pairs could automatically go to their breakout rooms without having to pre-assign them. And the challenge had to do with the fact that BSU students we could do this automatically with BSU students, but the students in Brazil are not BSU students, so we couldn't have the Zoom call do it this way. So we have some technological issues that we resolved. And then the third challenge had to do with absences. And as I mentioned, some attrition, some students dropped the course, some freshman students start and then don't finish. And then, they're still learning how to be a college student. And the other, and related to that was the fact that I had more students in my class. I had 19 students originally in my class, and Professor Cavallari did not have 19, had like 15 students. So she had to find volunteers, and she was able to find volunteers to match up with my students. And then so we were in constant communication to make sure that when, I was telling her, like, this student is been absent, the student has not made for the first meeting, the student communicated that she's gonna drop. And so she was able to assign that student with a volunteer. So then when the student dropped, then the volunteer didn't have to do. So she always had her permanent students were with my permanent students, basically. So that's one thing that that's one of the biggest challenges. It differently from the other Coil virtual exchanges that you have here is that my partners, they have to be with those partners for the entire semester so that they build on that relationship. So they're not changing like with Emily Spitzman's, Professor Spitzman's students, because there's so many opportunities to meet. Like if you have to meet a bunch of times during, then you can actually exchange, you can change around the practice. But because there's only 5 meetings, we have to make sure we establish that rapport. And that's what happened in that case. I don't know if Matthew wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I do think having the rapport is very helpful because it sort of helps, you can come back and keep asking questions. You can sort of add on to, stuff you've discussed previously. And I think it helps in terms of consistency for the students on both ends of it. And I think it helps in terms of topical consistency as well, being able to sort of build on, I know we talked about this last time. I know we talked about, X, Y, Z last time, how can we build off of that now? I know myself and my own conversational partner in Brazil, Haroldo, I know we've, referenced things that we've talked about in the past as well in other meetings. So having that sort of continuousness is very helpful. And even though there have been some technological difficulties, like I know Dr. Ferreira mentioned, I do think on the whole, it's been quite accessible for all of us being on Zoom. It's a mutual platform that pretty much everybody, as long as you have some kind of internet enabled device, you're able to connect to it, and that's it, no charge, nothing like that. So having it on a platform like that, even when it does have its occasional issues with breakout rooms stuff, I know I've borne witness to it. Certainly, this class wasn't my first experience having trouble with Zoom sometimes, and it won't be the last, but having that kind of platform that's really easy to access is also incredibly helpful.
Well, one of the biggest challenges for me was to really be mindful of my students' schedules. So with this particular class, there are 13 students in this class. Many of them work. One student has a child, so she has to get to the Child Development Center to get her child after class is over. So my class meets from 3:25 to 4:40 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Many of the students had they have classes just prior to our class meeting. So finding a time to get the videos done presented an interesting challenge. So we were able to do that. Some of the students came to my office like at 3 o'clock and did their videos. And that day I told the students who were already in class that we would be a few minutes late because this was a time where the students could do the video. So they met in my office and we did the videos. They did their videos via Zoom. So that was one way we kind of got around that particular schedule and challenge. And I do understand that if I was to do this again in future semesters, that it may be different, but it made me get to know my students' schedules at a different level because I really wanted to be respectful and mindful of their time and to try to incorporate as much of this into our Tuesday, Thursday, 3:25 to 4:45 class meeting as possible.
Since there's so much synchronous time together, the recruitment piece was really tricky for us in the beginning because a lot of students already had their schedule set up for the semester. And so that was really challenging. Like I really tried to do a hard sell and get people on board and, get students. And I contacted a lot of faculty members to spread awareness about the program. And it just was challenging initially. And now I'm hopeful that overcoming this challenge is through the success of the program, because I think the students' experiences have been so positive that I'm hoping to, when going forward, it would be nice to share students' voices and students' experiences the newness of selling something that I'm not that familiar with initially, like is a little bit challenging. And now I'm much better equipped about how I'll be integrating it into the class and exactly what the model will be. And also that synchronous time, if students get on board earlier rather than later in the semester, similar to what has been mentioned before, but the planning and the setting things up prior to the semester really makes a lot of sense.
I wonder, Kate, will want to add anything?
I agree with Dr. Spitzman, I guess just to echo her a little bit. For a student who would be registering for something like this, knowing ahead of time, because looking at it, it is a big time commitment. However, I have experienced that once I get into it, kind of like just once you get into your routine, basically like once it just becomes a part of your normal routine, you don't even think about that time commitment anymore. It's just kind of like with any other class, like, oh, okay, it's time to go to class. So I think it's just for a student who's registering for it, it's just kind of getting past that initial, oh my gosh, it's 3 hours a week. But then like once you break it up and you're just like, you think about it, oh, it's just like another class, it's in my schedule, then it doesn't feel so daunting, especially like once you get into it and then you start working on all the activities and getting to know all your other classmates, I guess. So that would probably, from a student perspective, be like the biggest thing for me. But like Dr. Spitzman said, if it's circulated early enough and people know about it, then I think they'll be prepared for the commitment.
Let me ask the same last question from the previous panel, is to ask each of you about any takeaways or tips you would like to share for faculty who would like to do something similar in the future.
Hello. So I think one of the things that was mentioned before as well is the level of preparation and the level of commitment that we have to have. And as Professor Savas mentioned, it's very important to find the right partner and to be super flexible. And so one of the things that I was very fortunate about was to find a partner in Brazil who had already had experience doing these programs before, and to have, to have that level of preparation before, to make sure that, the students are not just, aimlessly there in the Zoom call. There are so many things that we encounter throughout these exchanges that are fascinating. For example, in the very beginning, students had to talk about the fact that some of them were commuters. And, they couldn't find this word in Portuguese. And then I realized that I don't even know this word in Portuguese because it just, because everybody's a commuter. So that the students are, very few students are actually living on campus. And so that was one of the first things that we encountered, sort of like discovering the culture through the language. And so, I mean, as far as the sustainability of the program moving forward, I would say, make sure you do your due diligence, your research, find the right partner, and then just work throughout, before the semester starts with the planning process so that it goes smoothly. Not to say that you're not going to find some bumps in the road, but, at least you're prepared, right? And so I don't know if Matthew is smiling, so maybe you want to share some things there.
The commuter thing just kind of tickled me as a commuter myself, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if my piece of advice would be really super unique advice, but I would say, obviously this is probably something you've all taken into account, but wherever you have like mutual cultural competencies between your two countries, between your two classrooms, absolutely lean into them. I know in our unique case, and in our very specific case, obviously we have a very large sort of both Portuguese and Brazilian diaspora communities right here in southeastern Massachusetts, and so having that kind of connection, of which I'm a part. I mean, my great-grandfather was from the Azores. My last name is Donahue. That's my father's. Don't even mind it. But wherever you have those kinds of mutual cultural interests, whether it's, a student in your class, from one country or who has experience with the other country, so on and so forth, lean into it and make sure that, I mean, respectfully, obviously, But, you know, wherever you can build that kind of understanding and build on existing understanding, definitely do it. I found it's been, you know, super helpful in my own personal experience with this class. And anywhere you can do it, absolutely, you know, take advantage of that kind of thing.
And for me, the words that come to mind, and they've already been mentioned previously, but agility and flexibility. And having your plan and understanding that you may have to make adjustments to that plan based on your current context. And also, as you are planning, to think about how much of this already can be integrated into your course objectives and your course learner outcomes. And to also think about how you explain this to students as well. It's like, this is a different approach that we are taking here to reach our course objectives and our learner outcomes. I just wanted to say one more thing here that I didn't mention earlier about how proud I was of a couple of the students as they were doing their videos. So one of the University of Hong Kong students asked one of the BSU students, wanted to know the percentage of Asian students in Bridgewater, for example. And this student had done her due diligence and was able to answer that question like with about 3%. But she followed up with, and it won't matter if I'm in a classroom with all white students, it's still important for me to participate in projects like this because it's important for everyone, regardless of whether you're working in a majority BIPOC school district or one that is homogenous white. It's still important to have these kinds of conversations.
I'll have Emily and Kate to comment first before I get to Nick.
Thank you, Kevin. I think agility and flexibility should be our life motto. What a wonderful statement. I'm going to write that down actually and put a little sticky note next to my books, agility and flexibility. I love that. So from my experience, I think that first of all, please reach out to other faculty who have done these COIL projects, myself or others, because I'd be happy to meet with you if you are interested in participating in a project, because I think through the stories and through the support of others, we will be able to guide you in the right direction. Second of all, make sure that the connections to course content are explicit when you're thinking about, and make sure that you make it really clear to students about those connections back to course content, because I think especially having 3 different courses, I'm really working hard to make sure that the students are seeing those connections back to course content. I think that that's a very important component. And then third, document students' reactions and students' experiences. And in future iterations of these projects, have the experiences build on one another and be able to say, oh, my student from a previous experience in a COIL project said this, and you had similar or different experiences, and be able to show students the continuity piece.
I think just to kind of go off Dr. Spitzman as well, I think for student interest, being it like she was talking about, documenting student reactions and also being able to get students who have participated in these COIL courses to really advocate as well for them, for the next group of students who are coming in to register. Anyone's like, hey, I'm interested in this course. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And to get the student perspective of this is what we did. It was really interesting, etc., is really helpful to garner student interest, I would say. And I think what's really fascinating and is really unique to the COIL courses as well is that it opens up more possibilities for that international collaboration that everybody before COVID looked to for study abroad and travel courses in order to get that experience. And now we have more opportunities to really kind of bridge those connections, to establish these connections, excuse me, between different universities. And it offers, even though a Zoom session can't take the place of actually going to a country and integrating oneself in the culture, it still is a very, I suppose, could be viewed as an introductory experience for students, because it really allows them to speak to students who are living in this country daily, and just with the help of the professors facilitating these amazing conversations about like what different aspects of life are like over in these cultures. And I think to really promote that to students as they go to register, and then like Dr. Spitzman was saying, really kind of talking about what exactly will be discussed in the class is really helpful. And I think just being able to promote that establishment of international relationships with other students is really very, I suppose, for lack of a better word, attractive to students. And I think being able to get student testimony as well is what would really garner student interest, and I think is really great for promoting these Coil courses.
Yeah, definitely. Student voices are important. That's why we have Nicholas, Matthew, and Kate here today and sharing their insights. And Nicholas, you wanted to comment as well?
Yeah, I was going to say, also sort of jumping off what Matthew was talking about, I think also like leaning into our sort of shared cultural similarities, as well as like also like it can be equally as interesting as even like talking about the cultural differences as well. Because like then there's still a conversation to be had. It's like, all right, it's like why, like, how do we view these certain things, like, or do we have a similar view on something but for different reasons? And again, maybe there's like a history or sort of like folklore associated with that. And again, it's a good conversation, and I think it's like a good thing to also again record for as far as like cultural interactions and how that works out. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, we have a question from Dr. Joyce Ring Anderson. I think, would you like to ask it yourself?
It doesn't matter. I'm just curious about how many places they're doing Coil in. Is this something that faculty initiate? Just general information, I guess.
There are different models. Yes, Fernanda?
No, I was gonna say the way I initiated, because I knew that from going to conferences and talking to my colleagues that there was such thing as Teletandem, which is the platform that initially was used before the global pandemic. It was really hard to get students to do this interactive work, but because of the pandemic, you know, we were forced into these Zoom calls, and people became more versant in these. So I reached out to a couple of colleagues who told me that the Teletandem, which is the name for the exchange, was happening. And so I just cold emailed them, and I was able to get a response. And then I talked to this professor from UNESCO for like the whole entire summer. We were talking about, when are we going to start? Are we going to start in the fall? Are we going to start in the spring? And then we started in the fall. And she said, you know, we're going to call this a pilot project, only 5 meetings. And then we decided on which class. We went back and forth about, you know, we're going to do this in an intermediate class or at the elementary level class. So these details were worked out, you know, faculty to faculty. So it wasn't like a Coil, you know, a larger institution telling us what to do. We, you know, organically came up with this. And so as far as the number of countries, I think Wing-Kai can answer that more specifically.
I mean, right now we have 6 countries. We have 4 countries and 6 projects that are virtual exchange, but we're only talking about engagement and collaborations. If we're talking about exposure, we have dozens of events each year, which has one exposure to one class with a guest speaker, virtual guest speaker, or virtual exchange guest lectures. If we include those, would be like 12 countries, something like that, because all the global programs are doing this kind of exposure. So we're thinking about, using Coil as the last step to think about a continuum of events of connecting BSU to the world and the world to BSU. A lot of times we don't only think about mobility as, actual study abroad and actual international students, but we can do international experience and, give international experience to students through the virtual platform that we do, in our classes. So we are actually promoting collaborations as the most lasting, experience for students, but we also think that engagement is the first step. So they need to engage with each other. So that's why we're counting any class that has at least 2 meetings or 2 kind of format, 2 project, kind of videos and connections, all the way to 12 sessions. Or so it could be from 2 weeks project to 2 months project. So that's basically what these faculty members are doing right now. Hope this answers your question, and we're happy to work with you, Ring.
Actually, I would like to jump in that because I might be the only person who was not, I didn't initiate actually Dr. Walshart. I was kind enough to just invite me to join this Coil project with Osaka City University. And I believe there are many, actually Unkai might be able to tell us more about this, but I think there are many countries that are looking for more partners, especially in the English speaking countries and like here in the United States.
Right. So it could be either way. It could be our faculty and their faculty, our university and the other university that connect to each other. So our time is almost up. And is there anyone who would like to make some concluding thoughts? I don't know if I know Dr. Al-Baidi is always there to help as well. And because we're both at the Milling Institute trying to support faculty for these kinds of projects. From what you heard over the last 90 minutes from all the faculty and students, you know that virtual exchange is a very flexible and engaging and impactful experience for enriching your course content and delivery. And it can happen in so many different ways. Based from totally asynchronous to totally synchronous to anywhere in between in terms of percentage of synchronous and asynchronous content. As I mentioned before, it's also the goals of connecting students to through the 3 types of focus in today's presentation on education, culture, and language. And of course, it's not just between these issues, there are also other issues as well that you could connect students with each other. I've seen other faculty members who have done Coil projects on global issues that impact the world, and they could actually focus on any issues relating to society, economy, business, and anything that connects to the course content as well. So I'm going to, the approach of the Milling Institute is to invite faculty and support faculty in the future, and by funding some of the workshops and some of the conferences that are totally free, or we will pay for admission fees for that. And Alexandra and I recently participated in an international virtual exchange conference, and we found it very helpful and very, very useful. So there will be opportunities in the future, and hopefully next academic year, we'll start to have virtual exchange grants, similar to the service learning grants and the grants that are offered by the Martin Luther Institute that Kevin is involved in, and also other grants offered by OTL and other things. We need to find a model that works alongside with the other professional development opportunities. So thank you everyone for attending, especially our Professor Fusei, very late in Japan. So I'm sorry about having you to stay up so late to join us today. Really appreciate that. And thank you all.
That's Coil.
Yes, that's Coil.
Synchronous coil, yes.
Yes, but it's 1:39 a.m. in Japan right now, if you know about the time. So I appreciate that. Sorry about the inconvenience. Thank you all the students, thank you all the faculty members who attended. And please take a look at the, there's an event about Native American heritage tonight at 7:30. And Dr. Joyce Ring Anderson sent an email before, and please attend that if you have time. And also there are also other events on International Education Week, and so over there as well. So yeah, Dr. Liu had a question about any website. Yes, we can send you some websites about Coil, about that are provided by other universities.
Thank you.
Sure. So hope everyone have a good day. Thank you for joining. Thank you for these wonderful presentations. Bye-bye.
Thank you for inviting us, and thank you, my students, for showing up. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our guests.